We'll start with Jim Ross Way, who's given a pretty candid update on a rough weekend ahead of AEW Double or Nothing. Ross, who's 74, was at Double or Nothing in New York last Sunday, and as we know, he called the Continental Championship match between Moxley and Kyle O'Reilly. But on his latest Grilling JR podcast, he explained the trip did not start well before he even got out of the house. He was due to be picked up at 6 a.m. on the Saturday before the show to fly to New York. He suffered a fall at home, landed with his phone out of reach, so missed the pickup, ended up missing his original flight before getting rebooked. Then after he got to New York, he said that his back went out in the hotel and he was left very sore. He said his legs were very weak, and he's trying to find a doctor who can help him get back on track. On the work side, he praised Tony Khan, said he'd been really good to him, but he admitted he'd like to have called more than one match at the show and probably would have spoken to Tony about it if he'd realised beforehand that it would be his only assignment. The other piece of news is Jim Ross said his AEW contract is up sometime in August, or at least that's his understanding, and he'd met with his agent, but he said he's not going to really worry about whether or not he gets renewed. As we know, he was one of the original major hires back in 2019 when Dynamite launched. I just want to add my own little observation to all of this way before we talk about it. I saw Jim Ross in person at Forbidden Door in London last August. And while this is obviously like a personal impression from being in the building, I thought he was not long after some surgery, and that was his return. He did look pretty frail, getting to and from the commentary desk at that event. And when he talks openly about his falls, his back, weak legs, and trying to keep going, I think it's hard not to feel a bit concerned for the man, So I guess, how do you see JR at this stage, Way? Is he a valuable special voice they should preserve, or should we be more worried really about his health?
Yeah, honestly, as it relates to maybe these sort of stories, it's not the first time. In fact, it feels like I'm hearing more about Jim Ross's injuries at home and just outside of, obviously professional wrestling, but just traveling and things like this. I'm hearing more and more about this than I feel like I am hearing him, at least, when it comes to his commentary. There's more discussion about that side of things than his actual work. And I feel like we're all being nice about it. But I really think the time has long passed, when for his, I would say, any sort of permanent role for him, in AEW. Now, I think in these sort of infrequent appearances that he's been doing, I think he's been fine. But at this point, this deep into AEW's, life, are we only looking for fine, or are we looking for elite? Are we looking for the best? Certainly when it comes to the roster, year 1 AEW versus year 8 AEW looks very different. It's no longer just a place that has spots to be filled by really anybody, names, what have you, but it's there to be filled by people who are considered the best. And I think commentary is very much the same. And I don't think Jim Ross has been that voice for a long time now. Yes, of course, he lends a level of recognition. But I don't think that is very valuable these days. I also think, though, there's a very human element to all of this that I imagine Tony Khan is, considering when he's thinking about, this is the person who I would be concerned if they weren't necessarily attached to having some sort of mission, some sort of bigger role. And I don't know. I wonder how much, Tony Khan is really considering all of that in wanting to give him some sort of role, give him some sort of platform to do professional wrestling commentary, which Jim Ross seems to really want to do. Again, strictly speaking about his performances, I think they've been fine. But I wouldn't necessarily say they've been good, or at least better than I think the roster that they currently have.
Yeah, my sense was that they gave him probably the best match to commentate. And even then, there was a few voices on social media saying, he's calling Kyle the sort of up and coming kid, As opposed to Jim, he may well be, but I think Kyle O'Reilly's only perhaps a year younger than Moxley, so those in the know sort of feel like he's out of touch and so on. I'm with you. I think as a voice, he's sort of a through line to the history of wrestling, and that still has some weight. And he clearly still wants to do it. But the toll on the man, I feel, is just too. I felt, like I said last August, it was almost cruelty to put him on a long haul flight, which was redirected, by the way, because he talked about that on the podcast at the time. He ended up, I think, in Rome. The flight got redirected and all of this. And I just feel like at that age, not so much just the age, but with all of the health challenges he's had, it's taking quite a toll. And I feel that a really lovely thing to do would be to give him a tremendous send-off, and I think he would get that from the AEW crowd. I just don't think he wants it yet. This is a man who seems to just want to keep going. Really, since the death of his wife, it seems to be the thing that drives him.
Yeah, again, we don't know him personally. We can't really say. But I do think like there is, like retirement is tough, I think, for a lot of people because it takes away your motivation, to perhaps like do all the other things in your life, right? And he's got his podcast. But I would be very interested to know, let's say he doesn't re-sign with AEW, whether or not Tony offers any sort of like, I don't know, sort of like ambassador deal, but more importantly, whether or not WWE would offer something similar in any capacity. I'm curious if WWE would offer him an on-air role of some sort. I certainly wouldn't see him like, taking over for Wade Barrett or anything like that. But is there like, do you think there's a spot for him on air in WWE in any capacity?
Even though we had an extremely complicated relationship that he talks about in his books with Vince, I think if it was still a Vince McMahon WWE, he would be the person who might bring him back. I'm not so sure about TKO WWE. I think they're in a let's move on mode rather than a let's look back mode, unless it's sort of revisionist history about Hulk Hogan and so on that we've been getting lately. So I'm not so sure about that. I don't really know what on-screen role he could really do in today's WWE. I feel there's less road ahead of him in his career than, this isn't a revelation, than there is behind him. We'll just see. Obviously wish him the best, and hope that whatever problems he has with his back, with his legs, with all of this stuff, that he feels better. But yes, I think at the moment, the maximum is really just these, maybe one match, two matches on a pay-per-view. And not even every pay-per-view, because we're rapidly moving to 10 or 12 a year at AEW.
Yeah.
PostWrestlingCafe.com is your destination throughout the entire month of June. It begins with Open House Week, where all members on the free tier get a full week slate of extra content. Following that, we have Brandon Thurston live in Delaware to cover the WWE merger lawsuit, and we will be doing wall-to-wall coverage with daily audio shows. Plus, we have Rewind Away looking back at the career of Manami Toyota, a review of WrestleMania 33. Karen and Bruce will cover New Japan's Best of the Super Juniors final along with Dominion, and we will get together for a new Ask Away mailbag show. PostWrestlingCafe.com, the destination for you.